Welcome to the Smart Charge by Ridergy podcast. This is Claudio Jahn, founder and CEO of Ridergy. This is your show to learn about all things energy management and smart charging innovation for electric vehicles and fleets. Welcome to a new episode of Smart Charge. Today, we're joined by Andreas Jahn, Senior Associate at the Regulatory Assistance Project, RAP, one of Europe's leading experts when it comes to smart energy regulation and power market reform and grids. He has over 20 years of experience, joining Lichtblick, one of the first utilities in Germany, then the government, the ministries and associations, and then with the RAP being responsible for several topics internationally. He takes us behind the curtain of energy policy. Why does flexibility often remain untapped? How do outdated network tariffs and regulatory frameworks stand in the way of innovation? And what needs to change so that demand-side flexibility, storage, and smart EV and fleet charging can truly scale? We also take a look at international best practices, Germany's regulatory bottlenecks, and what a truly future-proof electricity system could look like. Let's dive in. All right, Andreas, nice to have you today. How are you doing?
Hi, great to be here. So yeah, I'm doing well and looking forward to that interview or to that podcast.
Awesome. Yeah, before we start talking about geeky energy systems topics and regulations, etc., for the listeners, can you introduce yourself so that they know who Andreas Jahn is?
Yeah, sure. So actually, I'm in the energy business since, more than 20 years now. I started with an energy retailer in the first and ended up with regulatory authorities. So with the ministry in Germany, I've been for a while with associations and now with a regulatory assistance project. And actually all of that happened because the framework wasn't set proper by then and developed over time, and obviously, resources or human resources has been required to add to that. And that's why I'm now with the Regulatory Assistance Project, or called RAP, to improve that, because there are benefits across the world to improve the framework. And at the end, the benefits, consumers and supply can contribute to the system and to the future, actually, to a clean future in this regard.
Makes sense. And one step back, how did you get into the energy system? What drew you to that?
Well, actually, the first was, it was liberalized, the market. And there has been plenty of jobs offered. And I did not know by detail what to do with my finalization of my studies, and I said, let's try the energy business, and that's where I'm still. So obviously, it was a good market opening by then.
So we're talking before 1997, right?
No, not that long. That was about 2000. So that was
because in 1997, that's when I think in the EU, the decision for the liberalization was done, but then maybe you can elaborate a bit on how long it took then for it to arrive in Germany, or at which point you exactly entered and what the situation was. Yeah.
Right. So that was actually indeed a process, and why we have energy markets today. That was actually driven in Europe mostly by the UK, because they liberalized in the first. And the industry got cheaper electricity prices. And the German industry was keen about that and said, well, we want to have competitive markets as well if we can get the prices down. So, and that was why there was pressure from the industry. And with that, by then when the UK was still part of the EU, then they developed in Brussels mostly, then the energy market, the internal energy market for Europe, with all these guidelines and regulations we have in place now. That was indeed in the last millennium, but in the first, it was in Germany, let's say, a bit different. There wasn't an authority appointed out to regulate the energy market. It was driven by agreements of the participants, of the associations actually, of network associations, of industry associations, and that was quite weak. It wasn't really any ex ante regulation, it was only ex post. So what means you can go to court if you don't agree to what they figured out and what the contract situation is or was by then. And it didn't work out well for a couple of years. And then the majority on the EU level decided, no, we need a stricter regulation. We need an authority what is setting up ex ante the framework. And the framework is the access, third-party access to the network, and the other is the costs. So the regulation of networks, fees, and the methodology in behind. And that was then by 2001 or 2, I think, the regulator. Until then, it was only the Telecommunication and Railway Authority has been appointed to become the energy regulator as well. And with that, they are responsible now for the grids of gas and electricity. So since, and that is a bit more than 20 years.
The Federal Network Agency, or Bundesnetzagentur in German, right?
Right.
All right. And so you started with the first job was at a new electric utility called, which one was it?
It was Lichtblick. By then, when I started, and well, it was like jumping into what is this, unknown water. But after just a few weeks, I've been ahead of all the established network or energy utilities because we wanted to get access, and they never provided access to any kind of other supplier. So that was great learning. And after a while, I said, yeah, okay, so I can do that. And then I got the opportunity to come to Berlin with the Ministry of Economics, which had been operating, by then it has been called a task force for third-party access, because there wasn't a regulatory authority. And that's why I'm in Berlin still. And that was the time, as I said, when the BNetzA has been appointed.
Got it. And for how long did you work at the ministry then?
After that? Oh, yeah, that was only a year, but that was much more learning as well, because it was highly political. At the end, this task force has been quit because, political issues, let's say. We've been kicked out, so it wasn't just me. There had been 5 or 6 from the industry helping the ministry with that, and there has been investigations on that later, even if that has been lobbying, etc., and all that. So I would say it was in between. It was because Germany wasn't really driving that forward to have an authority. It was, let's say Germany is sometimes keen about the benefits, but not that keen about really to establish the framework to achieve. And that was probably the 2 or 3 year time period what has been required.
And what were the other key responsibilities you had before now the current one with RAP?
Well, I've been with associations and retailers, and then it became more to be on the regulatory side, because there has been always issues on the access and on the regulation of the tariffs, and what came with all of that. And that has been with them on with retailers and with the associations on the regulatory side. So on to talk with the ministry, with the regulator, in the public as well.
Okay, so you
to drive that forward.
You saw the topic of regulations both from a ministry, then from an association, and then now as an NGO, one could say. Or
yes.
So you have different viewpoints on the topic of regulations, right?
Yes, indeed. And actually, that was the initial point when I've been thinking about, well, we can only achieve an efficient transformation of the system if the framework is setting right, if the incentives for the economy are there. And that wasn't by then. And that was when I met today's colleagues. They said, yeah, of course we do need. We know that every regulation is setting incentives. The other question is if these are the incentives you're up for.
Okay, yeah, we'll dive into that question in a second. Before doing that, maybe you can give some background on the RAP. What's the background, the history behind it, the mission, and your then concrete responsibilities?
Sure, thanks. RAP has been founded already 30 years ago, I think, yeah, in the US. That was even before the markets in the US has been liberalized. In the US, it's a bit different in that way that the regulators are appointed or elected for a period of time only. And when the time ends, the knowledge is gone with a person. And that's why two regulators had been thinking about by then how to keep the knowledge in the system, in the market. And that's when they found some other guys to finance that. And that's when RAP became a project. And that's what we are still named for. And we are operating in a bit different way globally. So in the US, it's more that they are former commissioner working, while it is in Europe, for example, it is more that there are other experience in our team as well, and even cross-sectoral more. It's not all from the power system and not all from the regulatory perspective. It is as well from transport perspective, from heat perspectives and industry, what we added to the team, because it's all on the electrification side. So that is why Europe is a bit different. We're working, and we are as well in India and China. But I would say these systems are much further away than the US, at least from the European system, and within our organization, unfortunately too.
Okay. And how can one imagine the role of such an organization? What do you aim to achieve? What are the main goals and reasons to exist, so to say?
Well, actually, I would say to make myself useless. Well, the idea is, of course, to decarbonize the system by lowest costs. And that means to electrify, setting the right incentives that all folks running into the same direction. But unfortunately, we are not doing yet. So that is what we are financed for by foundations mostly, sometimes by contracts from authorities, but not from the private sector, how we are engaging. But of course, we are engaging as well with the private sector, with other NGOs, and helping to making things public in one jurisdiction. But what we found out that the energy markets and even the regulation is very fragmented across the world, and that it is very helpful to have examples from elsewhere, how things do work, and to explain what we can do and what has been proved elsewhere.
Successfully.
And I would say, mostly in the German context, it is Germany is running 10 studies before they are changing a dot in the sentence. While others are just running pilot projects and figuring things out. And that's why it is cross-fertilization of that.
Makes sense. So you try to spread these different best practices across the world as well in the regions you named and operate especially?
Yes. And actually, this is what I like to do. It is to learn and to think about how these can be adapted to another jurisdictions. That is actually great.
And let's dive into some examples or also topics of regulations that you think are key in this new world to enable electrification and decarbonization. Maybe you can give some examples that come to mind.
Sure. So yeah, I think the first it is that we know that decarbonization works through electrification. This is one probably of the biggest achievements over the last decade, because that wasn't clear on the first when I started in that field. So that is definitely good, but that means how to achieve that by lowest cost. That is, I would say, unclear. And for example, it is still, and then we're diving much more into the details, it is, we need grids to serve the customers for all the needs they do have. That is at least how the energy system has been built over the last century, to serve the load. So we need flexible supply. But that has been changed with the electrification, with the decreasing costs of supply, or mostly of PV and of wind, and now of storage as well, of the batteries. So that is a huge chance to change the system. If we continue in the old fashion, it is probably not that beneficial. So, as we all know, we have flexibility, but we are using not the flexibility in the best manner yet.
Mm-hmm. So, what are the hurdles for unleashing flexibility and regulatory best practices that you have identified?
The thinking, actually. We are not there yet. So I explored that a couple of times, that quite a lot of people, their responsibility for operations, for even policies, on regulation, they all still have in mind there's a need, and we have to serve the need from a central perspective. But the system of the future is so different. It is much more decentralized. It is flexible in bidirectional. And we can help each other with that. But that isn't there, nor the framework. It has to be developed. Partially it is in some jurisdictions, but it has to be combined for the needs of local needs in the first. But on the other hand, that is why electricity is so special. We have a huge benefit by sharing across huge regions. So let's say for heat, we don't supply, let's say, a load pocket what is 1,000 miles away. But on electricity, that might make sense to some extent. To some extent, it is good to have a local assets and flexibility as well. And that is the difficulty of the system. That is, it has more dimensions than the old system and other systems as well.
And maybe one step back, there is different regulatory systems across the world. Can we create pockets? There's liberalized markets and non-liberalized markets. Is that a good way to look at the different energy regulatory environments and countries in the world?
Yes, definitely. That is a very good question. Thanks for that. So that is, and to start with that, Europe, for example, it has huge differences, but it is still very homogeneous. So let's say the US, for example, is very different in this regard. They have liberalized markets, but they have fully regulated markets as well. And with that, we can learn from that. While, of course, China is totally regulated, there is more or less no competition at all. And looking at energy markets globally, we have, I would say, 3 steps. So in the first, you can liberalize the supply side. You can set up a third-party access by independent power producers. So that is usually the first step. Then as the second, you can set up wholesale markets, competitive wholesale markets. And the third is the top of the ice cream, is then the competitive retail market. We do have that in Europe, but I would say if you're coming from a totally regulated market, you shouldn't look up at that in the first. So it is, it has its issues, but let's say these are the 3 steps. And for each of that, you need different kind of framework of regulation, what you do and how.
Is it fair to say that the UK is among the most advanced systems or in terms of a regulatory framework that is very favorable to the new energy world?
Yeah, in at least in Europe, it has in some regards, and actually, that's why it's a pity that the UK left the EU. They have been driving that development in Europe. Now, well, they are still in Europe, but not of the regulatory and policy making machine anymore. But yeah, that was of the prices and of the regulation. And let's say, for example, in Europe, the UK was the first state they established an incentive-based regulation for the network operators. It's the second or third edition what they established now, setting detailed incentives that the network operators doing X, Y, and Z. That is definitely helpful, not just having a framework what is providing incentives you're not up for in the end. So, but there are other places as well. They have things done well in Europe, but of course elsewhere in the world too.
Right. Let's get a bit more in the details. So, just to name a few of the dimensions that I am aware of, that I would love to have you comment or maybe complement on them. So there's the grids, then there's the production, and there's the retail part in the regulatory frameworks. In the in the grids part, for example, having more dynamic grid fees would be very fruitful. For that, we have a lack still of dynamic tariffs in the grid fee structure that reflects the availability of congestion in the grids, or the availability of renewables, and so the capacity of these grids. That will be one interesting topic if you can elaborate. Then the second is to what extent the retail tariffs are dynamic, going to the spot tariffs, where you have 15 minutes changes of electricity tariff, but some markets have them, some don't. So how that impacts and how it will spread. And we see that the EU has, with the clean energy package since 2021, mandated that dynamic tariffs need to come. To what extent do they have to be every 15 minutes, and everybody will implement them, or still in the process of implementing them, and other countries would take notice as well in the world and copy that. So just to give two examples. And then a third one maybe is bidirectional charging, where we see that there is grid fees or taxes involved with charging and discharging a battery in a vehicle, and then oftentimes this is a fundamental hurdle for that value to be unleashed. So are there others that you would highlight, or would you comment on the ones I mentioned?
Yeah, sure. I'd like to do, definitely. So in the first, it is the networks. In the past, they had been built for the load, and not charged on the time when the networks has been used, and that is in quite a lot of places still the truth. What means that the asset owners, and actually that is their incentives to build assets. So to extend their asset base at the end, that is what regulation provides quite often, is building a copper plate. But we know at the end, with the flexibility we do have on the demand side, and we can use, or if we are not incentivized, maybe we are not using, and if we are all plugging in our car in the evening by returning back home from work, that means to build these networks, no one is up for. We can't afford at the end. So that is why we have to think about the flexibility. And in the first, the flexibility came into play by the wholesale market prices, because we know the sun is not shining in the night, obviously. Wind is fluctuating as well, and that need to be reflected in tariffs to adjust the demand for the first time to the load. But since the industry, the energy industry, I would say has been quite comfortable with the former revenue streams, with their cash cows and the regulation, there was not much innovation. And that's why the EU set up the framework and to say, with this obligation, you have to offer a dynamic tariff based on the wholesale market price, what is driven more from the renewables. So that is good at the end that we do have that now across Europe, but that is only then on the generation side. And the networks, that is still in the discussion or in the making, let's say, that some of the European countries do have that pricing already, or let's say it's a majority what has that. About 22 member states do have time-varying network fees in place. Germany just introduced this year,
right,
for some customers.
And AG 14a, yeah.
Indeed. And it is not mandatory. So that is, we are a bit behind, and then we have the discussion in Germany, how can you deal with the system if you can't meter, if you can't measure, if you can't charge? Well, hopefully we're speeding up.
Right.
Of course, we need smart meters.
Yeah.
Digitalization, well, I would say we can learn a lot from others.
Yeah. And are the countries that are not as advanced as other countries in terms of like the UK or other liberalized markets, are they adjusting? Is there a trend for the world to harmonize regulatory environments, say developing countries, for example?
If it's globally, I would say there's maybe a trend, but it is not so obvious. Let's say in the first to the EU, I would say yes. So we have seen, for example, that there are a lot of guidelines on the EU level and regulation, but for example, the network regulation or the methodologies of the tariff design, they are all with the member states. Luckily, Germany moved that now to the BNetzA, to the regulator, what was before with the government only. So that is a step forward. And now we are figuring out that Europe is still so diverse by tradition somehow, what the countries did or what they explained, why they are doing, others didn't even explain or whatever, that we need more harmonization. So we have a wholesale market what is interacting, and I would say in most places in a good way, but the retail markets across Europe are so different. And that is why businesses are struggling with that, because you establish in the UK and then you're stepping into the German market and wondering about how is that working out? What do I have to know to establish a business where is a revenue stream within that? How can I learn from that? So that is the UK, but that is even, let's say, from Denmark to France. There are huge differences. Mm-hmm. And that is why the Commission is pushing for that now. For example, they will come up this month, I think they promised to do, with guidelines on the network tariffs.
Interesting. Yeah, there's like also a good overview by, Smarten. I think they also have good overviews on the regulatory frameworks of different countries with the network tariffs.
Yeah, indeed. And sorry, one is not an official guideline by the Commission. It is a suggestion in the first. But they said in public, well, if no one is listening to a suggestion we are providing, we might think further. Mm-hmm. So
makes sense. And in talking about the grid tariffs, is there also one hurdle for electric vehicles in particular is also having enough capacity to charge at different sites? And there's a huge also grid fees related to connecting to the grid. Is that something that you see will change, or is there something in the making as well from a regulatory standpoint? What's your view on what should be the best way to enable as well more companies to move to electric vehicles without being forced to pay these massive amount of grid reinforcement fees?
Yes, so that is, and in this regard, Germany is in the forefront. Germany has a lot of studies what we might face of grid investments if we want to fulfill our transitional targets. And we learned this should be about 700 billion euros in the next 20 years, what we have to invest in the networks only.
It's a lot, yeah.
And I would say it is too much even. But the question is, where's these numbers coming from? And I would say there's a huge chance to deal with much less than that. But we have to make that, or to think about how can we be smarter and to use what we have in a better way. And for example, some places do have regulations in place where the utilization of the network is part of the incentive given to the operators. And I think this is a very good thing, that the network operator can say, yeah, before I'm investing into a new substation, maybe I can give an incentive to the users to avoid the peak hours, to avoid the investments. And by doing so, that is probably that we can cut off a lot of these predicted investments.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned already the grid fees being more dynamic and coming in Germany with the NVG 14A. That's more for the very, very low voltage. Then for the medium voltage, there's in Germany at least, there's a so-called atypische Netznutzung, the Stromnef 19. Is there going to be a lot of changes related also to medium voltages? We're talking fleets. It's going to be more and more electric trucks that will have also that incentive?
Yeah, definitely. And to your previous question, you asked because of the costs to build up for the interconnection to the system and Baukostenzuschuss, for example, what we have in Germany. And I would say this is all still from the old system. We are charging the people to connect. But from my perspective, that is not the crucial issue. It is how we use the system.
The operational phase.
Yeah, we should connect everyone who want to be connected by the costs what the interconnection is. But everything else is for the use of the system. If I want to use the system at peak times, of course, I have to be charged for. And at the end, I would say a candlelight dinner get a real value by doing so. If you avoid then the demand, what is usually in Europe and Germany in the winter evenings. While it is quite cheap to use a network by noon when the sun is shining. And we shouldn't penalize the demand by charging a car in that moment of time.
Makes sense. Yeah. So that's you're referring as well to the fee structure now that penalizes based on the peak you generate, but you don't determine which time. It doesn't matter which time you generate the peak, but we should measure which time it was that you generated the peak. If the network is not congested at that time, it's not a big problem. Whereas if it was congested, it's a bigger problem, right?
Right. And the point is regulation is, or it should provide the incentives ahead. That is why we need the pricing ahead. And it's not helpful for a customer as us if we informed the day after that the charging I did yesterday is instead of my annual vacation because it was at peak time. I should get an kind of incentive or information ahead of that to avoid that.
Right.
And that's actually what we need. And since the future system is driven mostly by the weather conditions, so of wind, of sun, and of temperatures, and of course of our behaviors, is it a holiday or is it a weekday, that matters as well. And that is known 24 hours ahead.
Exactly. I've seen you published a few interesting case studies with RAP. One is called the savings from smart charging electric cars and trucks in Europe, a case study for France. Or another one is unlocking flexibility, no regret actions to remove barriers to demand response, addressed to AFIR, so the regulators in Europe. And I think you also met Habeck at the bidirectional event that was a while back. Out of all these work, is there a few highlights you would like to share as well with the audience, or takeaways from your side?
I would say that the highlight is we are on the right track. And it is good to hear, for example, what you mentioned, that Habeck has been aware about. That is not just charging, it is bidirectional charging. That is a huge chance, and we should roll out the red carpet for that. It isn't there yet, at least not in all places, but this is what I still, seeing we are moving forward.
And we have been talking about bidirectional charging also quite some time. So from also maybe a meeting like the one you saw with Habeck, that was very much a powerful politician, at least in a powerful role, taking that topic in his agenda very higher up in the agenda, but still we are not seeing as fast progress as we would like to have. What's your take on why does it take so long?
I would say it is, we are still locked in the old thinking. That is, I would say, with network operators, with the utilities, how they has been established and what their revenue streams are. And that is even partially with the regulation. So they are looking at the ones they are regulating in the first and not having in mind how a future system could look like or should look like and how we can achieve by least costs. So that is not always there yet. And to come back to that, the bidirectional charging, that is definitely, it is complex because we have responsibilities in the system. We don't want to face a blackout as it happened recently in Spain and Portugal. And therefore we need responsibility for all these tiny assets connected to the system and making it big and useful and beneficial to all. But we have to know when you charge your car, at least partially. And we need IT structures for that. We need coordination. We need information, transparency, for example, all of that. And that is, I think it is still, when I started my job with web, it's still the same. Looking across borders is helpful. It is in the energy business, but it is for our entire life. It is helpful to see something else than the things you are used to.
Yeah, that goes back to one of the things, or the words, concepts I like to use. There's software-defined vehicles, and I think the energy sector is also software-defined energy. And as you also highlighted in the beginning, the software world was not ingrained in the way the energy system operated in the past as much as it today, and this requires a complete new way of operating, right, from traditional players.
Right, and it is when, let's say, network operators thinking about it, well, there's a huge potential of the EVs, of all this battery, huge storage we can use to balance the system. Their thinking is, I want to operate these resources to make my system cheaper, but they are not asking the customers for. I wouldn't say that we have to ask the customers for in the first, but we have to put the right places in place. So if we say, if it costs a lot right now, then there will be market providers, aggregators, suppliers. They will come up with offers to the customers, and they have to convince the customers to their products. And then they can help the system, the network operators, to come up with the cheapest and solution we are up for. But with that, it is up to the customer and to the market. So sometimes I'm surprised still by learning what markets are doing, if they are the right prices, and that is great. So when I've been asked, how can that look like? I say, well, I have apps on my phone. I don't know how they do work, but if they are telling me the right things, I can decide on, or I can adjust that they are doing the right things instead of looking every 5 minutes on my phone. And that's what we need as well. And I don't have to set that up by myself. This is the only thing what I know. We have to set the prices right. If we are coming up with the wrong price incentives, the people will do not the best what they could do.
Yeah. So in other words, we need the grid operators and utilities setting a certain price structure, and then let the market do the rest, right?
Right. Yeah. Exactly. That's the truth from my perspective. But Germany has almost 900 distribution network operators in place. And Well, I wouldn't say that they are really digitalized yet. They don't have smart meters implemented. And asking them, how about is it time-varying pricing of networks? Say, oh, wow, that is sounds fancy. How about dynamic pricing? Oh my God. So we can speed up a bit on that end.
Yeah, no, I agree. And then for the electric fleets, as this is also a lot about electric fleets and smart charging, is there any challenge you foresee in the upcoming years to electrify our fleets? And what would you suggest are like ways to tackle those challenges?
So in the first, I think fleets are much easier than a private car in a private household only. Fleets are much easier because you know usually when and where they're driving. You have certain points where you can charge, and you can adjust first the infrastructure for charging and then the price optimization with a wholesale or retail market and the networks. So there is a huge potential, and then even there it is much easier to start with bidirectional charging. So in the first, it is that the interconnection to the system is usually the most cost incentive investment for the flexibility, and that's why quite a lot are hesitating to install a bigger connection to the system. But as said, I'm up for to make it as big as possible, but to put the prices for the operation in place. And with that, then bidirectional charging of fleets, that is, I would say, the initial step to do that then at the end, even with private households or, let's say, apartments and car charging on the streets.
Makes sense. And do you distinguish between the types of fleets where you see more potential than other types of fleets?
Well, I would say it's economy of scale. The biggest are easiest to start with. If you're operating a DHL or someone by that size, of course, it's something else than having 3 cars for whatever kind of delivery in my neighborhood.
Mm.
That is, and it is connected to that, how much of depot charging I have in place. If I can rely partially at least on nighttime charging, means I'm more flexible than if I have a fleet what is operating on long distances and rely on fast charging. So that's what we see. That will be much more expensive to charge a truck after 4 or 5 hours of running full speed on a highway, to recharge then in another 35 minutes. That is more expensive, and that doesn't have a lot of flexibility. But the combination of both of that is, I think, where the benefits, even for businesses, are.
Makes sense. And for nowadays, a big hot topic is nowadays is the electric trucks that are coming more and more and growing very fast, even though they started the share was very small in the last few years, but they're really picking up momentum. I think the goal is in 2030 to have a third of the new sold trucks to be electric in Europe. Do you have any views there on the challenges ahead or the opportunities as well ahead for electric trucks?
Yeah, and I think the development will be more straightforward than the private car sector. We have seen so many ups and downs with it, but trucks, that is a commercial business. So it depends on the TCO, the cost of total ownership, and that's what we heard from the manufacturers. The trucks will be there. They will be sold to the market. They will be used. And no one is up for if my strawberries do end up in Cologne because of lack of charging and can't be delivered to Munich, for example. So that is what we can predict for the future. But what we can see on the other end is that the network connection, how we did for the last decades, it requires almost a decade to implement a fast charging point, what has to be connected to the high voltage level. And I would say the car manufacturers or truck manufacturers are a bit faster.
Yes. Yeah, so that will be the high voltage lines need to be sped up to be able to cope with all that capacity, right?
Right. It is, and the markets can deal even with limited infrastructures, with congestion. But it is so important having these incentives in place, that they are building at the right spot, that they are using when it's available or when it's cheap, and making the most of it, what we do have, and to avoid unuseless or avoidable investments.
Makes sense. Is there any other last messages you would like to leave here in the podcast for the listeners that you feel are important to consider in all the topics, in the wide array of topics that we touched?
Well, what is it? Participate in the system, because it is different from the past when the consumer has to be supplied. Now it is that the consumer can act. If it starts with the balcony solar, with your car, with a heat pump, with a battery, whatever, I think it is, in the first, it's more independency, resilience to the system. To some, it might make fun only, whatever it is. Check it out.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, definitely. The prosumer, as it's also called, and we can have a big role compared to the past where it was maybe boring. There are challenges, but also great opportunities.
Yeah.
And finally, how can people learn more about you or about your work or connect in case they have questions?
Well, sure. So I'm on social media, for example, on LinkedIn or Blue Sky. You can find myself, or on reponline.org. There are all the information. So what we are doing globally, locally, etc. Even on the industry side, on the decarbonization, what has its own challenges as well on the heat side, etc.
Excellent. Thanks, Andreas, and wish you still a great day.
Yeah, thanks a lot. A pleasure to being here.
And this was a great episode with Andreas Jahn from the RAP, the Regulatory Assistant Project. My key takeaways are that there are several differences between markets and regions. We see liberalized markets and unliberalized markets. The UK being at the forefront, the US having a mixed system, and the EU being quite harmonized, but some markets having more or less great regulatory aspects. We see grid fees being a very important issue and how that's structured, or bidirectional charging being impeded by also how tax and grid fees are being structured. There's like traditional players that lack the software skills as well to enable these type of business models. We see that the world gets more and more harmonized, and it's also changing fast, considering that 25 years ago there was nearly no liberalized markets in Europe, and it changed due to the cost advantages that are coming from that, and that the keyword flexibility is also very much shaped by regulations, and that was the key objective of the RAP from the get-go as well, to make sure that we have a cost-effective transition through great regulatory frameworks. And they do this globally, which is fascinating, as they might be one of the very few organizations having such a deep understanding of regulatory frameworks and trying to share best practice across different markets. He also identified fleets as a plannable source of flexibility for both smart charging in one direction or bidirectional charging. And really, his final take was to be engaged and try to improve this system as a prosumer or as an active participant. Thanks for tuning in, and please leave a review or follow us, give us 5 stars. That would be great, and share this with somebody who could enjoy from listening to this episode. See you soon.